Welcome back to the channel, you guys. We review anything and everything, and obviously this is still a follow-up to the beta, my beta setup. Now, since my two new betas are in the process of mating, I just wanted to show this so you guys can get a glimpse of this, because I don't know how often this is on camera, but it'll give you guys an idea of things. And I'll just let that run. Now, the reason why the male is going to keep bringing the female over to the left side of the tank is because that's where he formed his bubble nest. So he wants the female to stay in his area, and she'll come back over to that area. Now, they've been at this process for probably over 20 minutes now or longer, at least from the time that I walked into the room. It might have actually been a little longer than that. I think it actually was like about 30 minutes because I made some food for myself, ate, and they're still kind of going at it. So maybe about 40 minutes. So I'm not going to record just to keep going on, but I just wanted to give an idea of that for those who may not have seen that before. But I also want it to be known that if you put a male and a female beta in a tank together, from what I've seen in my previous main tank and what I've seen in this tank here, generally the male is going to, if you look at the back tail fin of the female, that's the red one, it's kind of a little bit chopped up a little bit. It's not as connected as it was in the beginning. The male will generally, when they're both inside a tank, the male will beat up on the female for a while, chase her around. It looks like it's a little bit savage. But then what happens is after a while, I guess the male wins over the female, and the female will start chasing the male. Sometimes just presenting herself almost like standoffish or showing like she's able to go toe to toe with him and be aggressive, or sometimes it will just be to get in front of him and let him know like I'm okay. But then eventually this is what happens. So when you see that process, don't get too scared to think that it means, that they're necessarily fighting just to fight. I think it's part of the courtship, just because these are very aggressive types of fish. So I guess that's natural for them, where we might see it and think that it's bad. Now, granted, we're all told that males will attack and hurt other males. So we just then assume that, well, if a male is fighting another female, that's bad also, but it's really not. The male will not go to the extent of, say, killing the female, at least that I've seen. And I think one thing you could do to mitigate that as well is if you introduce a second female, then he'll spread out that whole behavior to um, the other fish as well. So then it won't be just too much of an overload on one female. But then I guess when the mating process starts, you kind of would want to get that other one out of there, because I would imagine, I could be wrong, but the females, from what I've seen from my first main tank, the male gets stressed out about having the females near the clutch of eggs because he's afraid that they'll eat them. So essentially, the male has more of a parental role than the female does. So having more other fish in the tank will cause the male to be stressed out because he has to protect and push all them away. So my main tank at the time, all other fish species didn't live because of lack of oxygen. I was doing a natural non-filter type of tank, and what happened is I didn't have enough green in the tank at the time to realize that. And I found out later on from the pet store that I was like, well, why is it my other fish died but the betas lived? And I was told that betas actually can breathe air. They can go up to the surface and gobble air. So if the oxygen conditions aren't very great, they are good survivors. After that, I ended up finally getting on order my plants, which you see in this tank and you see in my main tank. And at that point, other species of fish can live inside the tank. But my point to that is that that actually kind of worked out, because by having no other fish in the tank, it allowed my male to only have to deal with the stress of just the mother and keeping her away from the eggs, because she would eat the eggs if that was the case, at least from the research I did. Whereas if you have too many other fish and it's a small tank, it's going to stress out the male, because then he's going to have to do a lot more work in protecting his eggs. And they say that he can get too stressed out to the point where it causes him damage. So be mindful not to have your male beta in such a stressful situation. If he is having children with the mother, it's fine from what I've seen to leave the mother in the tank. He's going to keep the mother away from the bubble nest. So if you don't have a decent sized tank, and then this tank might be a little too small, but I will have the option to be able to move the mother out of here now because I have more than one tank set up. But essentially, in the previous tank, which is a 10-gallon, the male kept the female away from the bubble nest, and she always had to be towards the edge of it was in the same position of the tank as this one is, the top left corner, and the female would have to be pushed to the far right end of the tank or somewhere down below, but was never at the top left corner, because that's where the bubble nest was, and the male just wasn't going to have it and would attack her anytime she went near it, which makes sense because he didn't want the kids to be hurt. And I seen him actually take care of the kids after the kids were born. But I think at some point, leaving most of the babies in the tank, I think at some point he started eating them. I would see him put them in his mouth and he'd spit them out, and he put them in his mouth and he spit them out. So I thought he was just doing a nurturing thing, but I think at some point, eventually, they'll start eating the babies. And so one baby survived, as I mentioned in my previous other video. One baby survived, which became really big and bright red. And I removed 5 of them just in case if the rest of the babies weren't to survive. And those ones, other than one of them died, the other 4 survived. And later on, out of those 4, one of them died when they were already like an older age. But so in total, I have 4 babies now that are now juveniles. But my point is that the father will do what he can to protect them from the mom. So just be wary of that. But I just want you guys to know this process, so that way, if you want to replicate this process, you understand how it works. They kind of wrap themselves up together into like a ball, and they sit there for a while. And then when they detach, they float almost as if they're knocked out. Then they regain themselves shortly after that. And this is just going to continue for a long time. Excuse me, I'm sorry about that. A long time after the fact. So I just wanted to show you guys that. And I'll catch you guys in the next video.